Machine learning. Guys, never forget to say machine learning. Lecture 12. Are we on lecture 12? What's going on? Oh my god. Look at this fucking list. Lecture 12. We got neural networks. Now we want to go see what is backlog.
Hi everyone,
and
welcome
networks.
to the second lecture on deep learning for CS229. So a quick announcement before we start. There is a Piazza post number 695, which is the mid-quarter survey for CS229. So fill it in when you have time. Okay, so let's get back to deep learning. So last week together, we've seen
he got a haircut, obviously.
What a neural network is, and we started by defining the logistic regression from a neural network perspective. We said that logistic regression can be viewed as a one neuron neural network, where there's a linear part and an activation part, which was sigmoid in that case. We've seen that sigmoid is a common activation function to be used for classification tasks, because it casts a number between -infinity and +infinity in the 0-1 interval, which can be interpreted as a probability. And then we introduced the neural network, so we started to stack some neurons inside a layer and then stack layer on top of each other. And we said that the more we stack layers, the more parameters we have, and the more parameters we have, the more our network is able to copy the complexity of our data, because it becomes more flexible. So can be interpreted to be used.
So we had the structure, architecture, and then we had this coefficient that we should have found
for classification tasks, because it casts a number between -infinity and +infinity in the 0-1 interval,
sigmoid,
which can be interpreted as a probability. And then we introduced the neural network, so we started to stack some neurons inside a layer and then stack layer on top of each other.
And we usually started from the last layer to design, because they were more effective.
And we said that the more we stack layers, the more parameters we have, and the more parameters we have, the more our network is able to copy the complexity of our data, because it becomes more...
Yes, the more parameters means better, right? Like theoretically, because whatever you can do with 5 parameters, you can definitely do with 10 parameters. As long as you know how to handle 10 parameters complexity, you can.
More flexible. So we stopped at a point where we did a forward propagation. We had an example during training. We forward propagated through the network. We get the output. Then we compute the cost function, which compares this output to the ground truth. And we were in the process of back propagating the error to tell our parameters how they should move in order to detect cats more properly. Does that make sense? All this part? So today we're going to continue that. So we're in the second part, neural networks. We're going to derive the back propagation with the chain rule. And after that, we're going to talk about how to improve our neural networks. Because in practice, it's not because you designed a neural network that is going to work. There's a lot of hacks and tricks that you need to know in order to make a neural network work. Okay, let's go. So, first thing that we talked about is, in order to define our optimization problem and find our right parameters, we need to define a cost function. And usually we said we would use the letter J to denote the cost function. So here, when I talk about cost function, I'm talking about a batch of examples. It means I'm forward propagating m examples at a time. You remember why we do that? What's the reason we use a batch instead of a single example? Vectorization. We want to use what our GPU can do and parallelize the computation. So that's what we do. So we have m examples that go forward propagate in the network, and each of them has a loss function associated with them. The average of the loss functions over the batch give us the cost function.
So yes, we had loss function and we had cost function. Average of loss function is called cost function. These terminologies, guys, we need to learn this. I usually have a strong resistance against memorizing stuff, but I know that at the end of the day you have to memorize some stuff.
And we had defined this loss function together. L of I, assuming we're still, and just as a reminder, we're still in this network where we had a cat. Remember? This one? Remember this guy? x1 to xn. The cat was flattened into a vector, RGB matrix into one
Cat
vector.
was flattened
and then there was
into a vector.
a neural network with 3 neurons, then 2 neurons, then 1 neuron. Remember? Fully connected here. Everything.
Mm-hmm. I remember.
Up, and then we had y hat. You remember this one? I think that was this one, right? Yeah, okay. So now we're here, we take m images of cats or non-cats, forward propagate everything in the network, compute a loss function for each of them, average it, and get the cost function. So our loss function was the binary cross entropy, or also called the loss function, the logistic loss function, and it was the following. Y hat log
fuck
of y hat
distractions.
I plus 1 minus...
One thing, and I'm done. One thing. Let me add one thing to my phone. Fuck, just listening to this, I'm not recommending this here, but I am doing it. Like, completely distracts me, but... And if you say yes to this stuff, it distracts you even more. And I'm in a trap right now, but believe me, it's the last thing. That's it. Okay. Guys, I don't have much money. Otherwise, I would break this fucking window and throw it away.
Yes. yi log of 1 minus
That's why you need to get rich. Once you get rich, you don't need phone.
At I. So let me...
Guys, let's learn machine learning, apply for a job position, get money,
and what we said is that
log
this
loss
network has many
function.
parameters.
We are
And we said
losing
the first
every day.
layer
We
has
don't
W1,
make money. We are losing money.
The second layer has W2, B2, and the third layer has W3,
B3.
B3, where the square bracket this
Layer.
denotes the layer.
I see.
And we have to train all these
guys.
parameters. One thing we noticed is that because we want to make a good use of the chain rule, we're going to start by computing the derivative of these guys, W3
first.
and B3, and then come back and do W2 and B2, and then back again, W1 and B1, in order to use our formulas of the update of the gradient descent, where W would be equal to W minus alpha derivative of the cost with respect to W. And this for any layer L between 1 and 3. Same for B. Okay, so let's try to do it. This is the first number we want to compute. And remember, the reason we want to compute derivative of the cost with respect to W3 is because the relationship between W3 and the cost is easier than the relationship between W1 and the cost. because W1 had much more connection going through the network before
Composition
ending
of
up
the function.
in the cost computation.
Chain rule.
So one thing we should notice before starting this calculation is that the derivative is linear. So this, if I take the derivative of J, I can just take the derivative of L. And it's the same thing. I just need to add the summation prior to that because derivative is a linear operation. That makes sense to everyone? So instead of computing this, I'm going to compute that.
Okay, guys,
And
I'm
then
getting
I will add the
distracted,
summation.
but I'm
It will
not
just make our
listening to
notation
this
easier. So I'm taking the derivative of a loss of one example propagated through the network with respect to W3. So let's do the calculation together. I have a 1, I have a minus yi, derivative with respect to W3 of what? We remember that y hat was equal to sigmoid of W3x plus b, or W3A2 plus b, because A2 is the input to the second layer, remember? So I would write it down here, sigmoid of W3 A2 plus B3, okay? Yeah. Is it good like that? It's too small? W3 A2 plus B3. Is it good like that? Yeah, okay. So we have this term, and then we have the second term, which is plus 1 minus yi times derivative of W3 with respect to W3 of 1, oh, sorry, I forgot the logarithm here, of log of 1 minus sigmoid of W3 A2 plus B3.
It's just a differentiation.
And so, just a reminder, the reason we have this is because we've written the forward propagation in the previous class. You guys remember the forward propagation? We had Z3, which took A2 as input and computed the linear part. And sigmoid is the activation function used in the last neuron here. Okay, so let's try to compute this derivative. Yi, so the derivative of log prime equals 1 over log. Remember this?
Next session is
this
about
formula?
debugging ML
So
models and error analysis.
1 over x.
Expectation maximization.
1 over x if you put an x here.
EM,
So log prime
expectation
of x.
maximization algorithm, and
So I will
factor
take
analysis.
1 over sigmoid of W3 A2
And we
plus
have
B3.
Andrew
I know that
Wright,
this
by the
thing
way,
can be written A3,
independent
right?
component analysis.
So I will just write A3 instead of writing the sigmoid again.
Markov decision process
So we have
and
1
value
over
policy.
A3 times the
iteration,
derivative of
continuous
A3 with
state
respect to
entry.
W3. When you
So
remember
they are
that, I'm
just
going to write it
Markov
down here.
processes.
If we take the derivative of sigmoid of blah blah blah, let's say derivative of log of sigmoid over W, what we have is 1 over the sigmoid times the derivative with respect to W3 of the sigmoid. Does that make sense? That's what we're using here. So the derivative of sigmoid prime of x is actually pretty easy to compute. Is sigmoid of x times 1 minus sigmoid of x.
What?
Okay, so I'm just going to take the derivative. It's going to give me
How is that
A3
it? Because it's
times
logarithmic.
1 minus A3. There's still one step because there's a composition of 3 functions here. There's a logarithm, there's a sigmoid, and there's also a linear function.
What is
Wx
the
plus
sigmoid
b,
here?
WA2 plus b. So I also need to take the derivative of the linear part with respect to W3.
So wait a second, okay. Ln of sigmoid will be sigma minus sigma x squared, right? Sigma prime over sigma will be... okay, so sigma prime over sigma 1 minus sigma. 1 over sigma times 1 minus sigma is 1 over sigma plus 1 over 1 minus sigma. So it is ln sigma plus ln minus 1 minus sigma. So yeah, it is. See, our sigmoid is that logarithmic log loss function, right? Okay.
Because I know that sigmoid of W3 A2 plus B3, if I want to take the derivative of that with respect to W3, I need to go inside and take the derivative of what's inside. Okay? So this will give me the sigmoid or whatever, A3 times 1 minus A3 times the derivative with respect to W3 of the linear part. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to write it here bigger. Here I need to take the derivative of the linear part with respect to W3, which is equal to A2
He's
transpose.
teaching us how to make a derivative. Fuck that, dude.
So one thing you may want to check is when we compute, when I'm trying to compute this derivative, I'm trying to compute this derivative. Why is there a transpose that comes out? How do you come up with that? You look at the shape here. What's the shape of W3?
Vector. It's a vector, right? N times 1 times
remembers?
n. 1 times n.
1 by 2, yeah. Why
Why?
1 by 2?
Why is it 1 by 2? What is n?
Yeah, it's connecting 2 neurons to 1 neuron, so it has to be 1 by 2. Usually flip it. And in order to come back to that, you can write your forward propagation, make the shape analysis, and find out that it's a 1 by 2 matrix. How about this thing?
1 by 1.
What's the shape of that?
It's a number. 1 by 1.
Hmm?
So you're...
It's a scalar, yeah. It's a scalar,
Derivative.
so it's 1 by 1. How do you know? It's because this thing is basically Z3. It's the linear part
We are
of the last neuron. And
differentiating
A3 we
with
know that it's
respect
1
to a
has, so it's a
vector,
scalar
W3.
between 0 and 1. So this has to be a scalar as well. Because taking
Which
the
means
sigmoid should not change the shape.
differentiating
So now,
regarding to each
the
element.
question is, what's
right?
the shape of this entire thing?
We had, okay, in calculus, calculus 2, we had directional derivative, right? Actually, that is what it is. We have directional derivative, which is gradient, inner product of gradient and that unit direction.
The shape of this entire thing should be the shape of W3. Because you're taking the derivative of a scalar with respect to a higher dimensional matrix or vector here, called a row vector. Then it means that the shape of this has to be the same shape of W3. So 1 by 2. And you know that when you take this simple derivative in real, like with scalars, not with high dimensional, you know that this is an easy derivative. It should give you A2, right?
Exactly.
But in higher dimensions, sometimes you have transpose that come up. And how do you know that the answer is A2 transpose? Because you know that A2 is a 2 by 1 matrix.
All right.
So this is not possible. It's not possible to get A2 because otherwise it wouldn't match the derivative that you're
Thanks to
mathematics.
mathematics.
So it has to be A2 transpose.
Calculus
So either
2
you learn
is
the
for
formula by
sure
heart,
one of the
or you learn
most
how to analyze.
interesting
Okay.
part of mathematics.
Any questions on that?
It's all about
So that's
integrals
why it's A2 transpose.
and derivations, and these are the
Now-
things I like. I don't like coding. I don't like combinatorial analysis. I like continuous spaces that we can
Minus
swing
yi.
and
so
go
I'm on
through
this
the
one now. Second term of the
gradient
derivative. And I take the
over a
derivative of
dragon.
this, so I get 1 over 1 minus A3. A3 denotes the sigmoid, so I'm just copying this back, using the fact that the derivative of logarithm is 1 over x. And then I will multiply this by the derivative of 1 minus A3 with respect to W3. I know that there's a minus that needs to come up, so I would write it down here, minus 1. And I also
Linear
have the
algebra
derivative of
shows
the
up
sigmoid
there.
with respect to what's inside the sigmoid.
Measure
So A3
theory, like all of this
times 1
intricate
minus
stuff
A3.
that we have this flow
And what's the last
inside
term?
an
The last
environment
term is
and
simply the one we just
flow
talked about.
outside. They should
It's the
match
derivative of
with
what's
the
inside the
amount of
sigmoid with
production
respect to W3.
inside that,
So it's A2 transpose.
and you can rigorously define all of these intuitions. That's beautiful.
So now I will just simplify. I know that this scalar simplifies with this one simplifies with that one. I'm going to copy back all the results, minus yi times.
So wait a second, what is 1 minus AI? That doesn't sound right.
1 minus A3
Anyways, it's just about
A2
differentiation. Somebody can
transpose
compute it.
plus 1 minus yi times the minus. I'm going to put the minus here. So I'm taking the minus, putting it on.
Oh, maybe 1 is just a vector of all vector of all ones.
Front times A3 times
It
A2
is, bro.
transpose. And then quickly looking at that, I see that some of the terms will cancel out, right? Okay, so I have one term here, yi times minus A3 A2 transpose would cancel out with plus yi A3 A2 transpose. Does it make sense? So like the term that will multiply this number will cancel out with the term will multiply this number.
I don't want to sleep.
It gives me y
I don't want to
times
sleep.
A2 transpose.
I want to finish this video. I want to finish this video. I want to finish this video.
This because
I
I
want
have
to
the same
finish
term
this
A2 transpose.
video.
And it gives
I
me
want to
finally
finish this video. I want to 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 finish this. I want to hit this table so hard when I. Oh, it jumped. The mouse
Any
jumped.
questions on that? I should write it quickly and then we're going to move to the rest. So once I get this result, I can just write down the cost
Once I get this result,
with respect to W3. I know it's just 1 minus.
1 minus.
I just need to take the summation.
Take the summation, my man.
Of this thing.
1 over m, sum over m.
yi
1 over
minus
m,
A3
sum over m. It is called average.
y2 transpose
1 over
and
m,
A2 transpose.
sum over m. It's called
And I have a minus
average.
sign coming
1
back.
over m,
So
sum
that's
over
my
m.
derivative.
It's called average.
Okay, so we're done with that, and we can
We are
can
done
just
with
take
that.
this formula,
We are done with that.
plug it in
We
back
are
in
done
our
with that.
gradient descent
We
update
got
tool,
the
and update W3.
derivative. We got
Yeah.
it. We got it. We got it. We got rooms.
Now, the question is, you can do the same thing as we just did, but with B3. It's going to be the similar difficulty. We're going to do it with W2 now, and think how does that backpropagate to W2.
Back propagate.
So now it's W2's term.
It's
wanna come to
another
the
layer
derivative of
deeper,
L,
right?
the loss with respect to W of the
We
second layer.
do W3 and then do W3.
The question
W2.
is how I'm going to
That's how I do it.
this one without having too much work. I'm
Too
not going to start
much,
over
too
here.
much
As we said
work.
last time, I'm going to
Time.
use
It's
the
called
chain
chain
rule of
rule.
calculus.
It's called
I'm
chain
going
rule.
to try to decompose this derivative
Chain rule
into
is the
several
main
derivatives.
rule.
So I know
Chain
that
rule is
y
the main
hat
rule. Chain rule
is
is
the
the
first
main rule.
thing that
Chain
is
rule is the
connected
main
to
rule.
the
Chain
loss
rule is the main rule.
right?
Chain rule is the main rule.
The output neuron is directly connected to the loss function. So I'm going to take the derivative of the loss function with respect to y hat, also called A3. Right? This is the easiest one I can calculate. I also know that A3, which is the output activation of the last neuron, is connected with the linear part of the last neuron, which is Z3. So I can take the derivative of A3 with respect to Z3. Do you remember what this is going to be?
Z3. Okay, I don't know.
Of
Read
A3
it
with
from
respect to
here.
Z3.
Bitch, we have memorized
sigmoid.
10,000 of
A3
this,
equals
then
sigmoid
in
of
2
Z3.
years.
So
Now we have
this
open
derivative
AI,
is very
chat
simple. It's
GPT.
just that.
Like, I'm panicked
A3
for
times
2
1
days
minus
what is
A3.
going to happen with future.
Right?
They compute
So
all
I'm
of
going to
this
continue.
stuff.
I know that Z3,
We don't need to memorize any of
Z3 is
this.
equal to what?
We need
It's
to
equal
memorize
W3
new stuff.
A2 plus B. Which
We
path
definitely
do I
want to
need take
memorize,
in order
but
to
in
back up?
general, the point with memorizing is that we don't want to memorize too much. It's not medical school. It's not law school or any bullshit school. It's engineering school. We can look at our books whenever we want. Our exams are open book here. We don't give a fuck. We have access to internet. So we are not dumb fucks. We keep our memories free because we wanna use them when we want them, when we need them, when we our RAM should be empty. You know, we don't want to use a lot of RAM space. Yeah, we definitely work on our memory and we try to memorize things that matters, but bullshit, we don't want to memorize them.
But
Now
yes,
you go
I
ahead,
don't want to take the
motherfucker.
derivative with respect to W3 because I will get stuck. I don't want to take the derivative with respect to B3 because I will get stuck. I will take the derivative with respect to A2 because A2 will be connected to Z2. Z2 will be
Biggest
connected to
skinny.
A1 and I can backpropagate from this path. So I'm going to take the derivative of Z3 with respect to A2 to have my error backpropagate and so on. I know that A2 is equal to
A2.
sigmoid of Z2. So I'm just going to do that. And I know that this derivative is going to be
A2.
easy as well. And finally, I also know that Z2 is connected to W2. So I'm going to take the derivative of Z2 with respect to W2. So just what I want you to get is the thought process of this chain rule. Why don't we take a derivative with respect to W3 or B3? Is because we will get stuck. We want the error to backpropagate. And in order for the error to backpropagate, we have to go through variables that are connected to
Go
each
through
other.
variables.
Does this make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense.
So now the question is, how
It
can
does
we
make
use this?
sense. I think
How
it
can we use the
will
derivative
end up
we
in
already have
race
order to
multiplication,
compute the
multiplication.
derivative with respect to W2? Can
But
someone tell me
he's
how we can
really
use
good
the results
teacher.
from this
He's a
calculation
really
in order
good
not
teacher.
to do it
He's
again?
patient. He's not going fast, and he asks questions. He asks questions if students understood.
You cache it?
Like simple questions. He
so
doesn't ask questions
there's
that
another
requires
discussion
a
on
lot of
caching,
thinking.
which is
Either
correct,
he
but
asks,
in order to
what
get this
about
result very
intuitive
quickly, we will use
stuff
cache.
like
But
you wanted to
what I
find a
want here is
fat,
you
a
to tell me
cat,
if this result
dog, and a
appears somewhere.
orangutan, or he's asking simple question about the
first three terms?
size to make
this
sure
one,
that
this one, and this
students
one?
are following this fucking multiplication.
Yeah. Is it the first two terms or the first three terms? The first two terms, yeah. But good intuition, yeah. So this result is actually the first two terms here. We just calculated it. Okay? How do we know that? It's not easy to see. One thing we know based on what we've written.
It's not easy to see. That's great.
Very big on this
What
board.
a good sentence. Like, students will, alright, if I'm fucked, it's okay because it's not easy
Is
to
that
see.
the derivative of Z3,
I will
because
give
this
him
is
the
Z3,
best teacher ever.
derivative of
Instructor,
Z3 with respect to
probably.
W3
Whatever.
is A2 transpose, right? So I
Stanford
could write
is
here
blessed to
that
have
this
you.
thing
I don't
is
even know his
derivative
name.
of Z3 with respect to W3. Is it correct? So I know that because I wanted to compute the derivative of the loss to W3, I know that I could have written derivative of loss with respect to W3 as derivative of loss with respect to Z3 times derivative of Z3 with respect to W3. Correct? And I know that this is A2 transpose, so it means that this thing is derivative of the loss with respect to Z3. Does it make sense? So I got my decomposition of the derivative we had. If we wanted to use the chain rule from here on, we could have just separated it into two terms and took the derivative here. Okay, so I know the result of this thing. I know that this thing is basically A2 minus Y
I don't want to
times
sleep.
A2 transpose. I just flipped it.
I don't want to sleep. 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 I don't fucking want to sleep.
Now, tell me what's this term?
I don't want to. I don't
What is
want
this
to
term?
sleep. I don't want
Let's
to
go
sleep.
Yeah. So sigmoid, I'm just going to write it A2 times 1 minus A2.
But to be honest, this is boring.
If that makes sense. Sigmoid.
Like,
times 1
yeah,
minus
I get it. He's taking his time
What is
so
this
that
term?
the students understand what's happening. But at the end of the day, it's give us the fucking formula, bitch. Bitch.
Oh, sorry, my bad. That's not the right one. This one.
Fuck, fantastic. Took all of our time and now you're wrong. Fuck you.
This one is sigmoid. A2 is sigmoid of Z2, so this result comes from this term. What about this term?
Why don't you tell us?
Mm-hmm.
You are being
Sorry?
paid.
W3? Is it W3 or no? I heard transpose. How do we know if it's W3 or W3 transpose? So let's
Size.
look at the shape of this. What's Z3? It's
Number.
1 by 1. It's a
One
scalar.
by one.
It's the linear part of the
Scalar.
last neuron. What's the shape
Yeah.
of that?
One.
This is 2, 1. We have 2 neurons in the layer. W3, we said that it was a 1 by 2 matrix, so we have to transpose it. So the result of that
I'm sleeping.
is W3.
I'm not sleeping.
Transpose.
I'm not
And
fucking
how about the last
sleeping.
term?
Oh, I am not sleeping. I just woke up. What do you mean I'm
They
sleeping?
want transpose.
I am not. I am not. I am not. I am not. I
Okay.
am not. I am
Yeah.
not. I am not.
This one? There's a transpose here.
Faster! Tell a joke. Make it funny. Okay, I don't want to get engaged in the
Yeah,
derivative
you're correct,
market.
you're correct. Thank you. That's what you mean? Yeah. This one was from DZ3, DW3. We didn't end up using that because we will get
We
stuck.
ended up using that. We ended up
Any other
using
question?
that.
Or
We
once?
ended up using that. We ended up
So that's cool.
using
Let's
that. We ended
write
up
down
using that. We
our
ended
derivative.
up.
Clean
That
the board.
in whiteboard, new version starts right now.
Derivative of our loss function with respect to W2, which seems to be equal to A3 minus Y from the first term. The second term seems to be equal to W3 transpose. Then we have a term which is A2 times 1 minus A2. Okay, and finally we have another term that is A1 transpose. So are we done or not?
Well, if we are not done, why are you keeping writing? Just do
So
until
actually
you
there's-
get finished.
the
I'm
thing
tired.
is-
Actually, you know what?
There's two ways to compute
He
derivatives.
made me
Either you go
regret what
very
I said.
rigorously
Fuck
and do what you
him.
did here
every time I ask a
W2.
question, bullshit. Cut the
Or
bullshit
you try
out.
to do a chain rule analysis.
Show us machine
and you try
learning.
to fit
I
the
know how
terms.
to do
problem is
differentiation,
this result is not
take
completely
derivative.
correct. There is a shape problem. It means when we took our
There's
derivatives,
a
we should
shape
have
problem.
flipped some
Your
of the
shape
terms.
has a problem.
We didn't.
He's just
There
a
is
skinny
actually,
bitch.
we won't have time to go
I'm a
into
skinny
the details
big.
of this lecture
Look at
because we
this.
have other things to see.
Big
but
is
there is
skinny.
a section note, I think, on the website which details the
Our
other method
sponsor
which is more
for this
rigorous, which is like
video,
that for all the
Big
derivatives.
is skinny
What we're
wallet.
going to see
If
is
you
how we
want,
can use chain
if
rule
you're
plus
rich,
shape analysis
if
to
you
come up with the
need
results very quickly.
to handle big
So
money,
let's analyze the shape of
you
all
need
that.
to buy big
We know that
skinny.
the first term is a scalar. It's a 1 by 1. We know that
1
the
by
second
1.
term is the transpose of 1 by 2, so it's 2 by 1. And we know that this thing here, A2 times 1 minus A2, is 2 by 1.
A2, who was A2?
It's an element-wise product. And this one is A1 transpose, so it's 3 by 1 transpose.
2AFM.
So it's 1 by 3.
Oh, okay.
So there seems to be a problem here. There's no match between these two operations, for example.
Match it, brother, match
So the
it.
question is how can we put everything together? If we do it very rigorously, we know how to put it together. If you're used to doing the chain rule, you can quickly do it around. So after experience, you will be able to fit all these together. The important thing to know is that here there is an element-wise product, which is here. So every time you will take the derivative of the sigmoid, it's going to end up being an element-wise product. And it's the case whatever the activation that you're using is. So the right result is this one.
Give us the right result. Result.
So here I have my element-wise product of a 2 by 1 by a 2 by 1. So it gives me a 2 by 1 column vector. And then I need something that is 1 by 1 and 1 by 3. How do I know what I need to have? I know that the shape of this thing, W3, needs to be 2 by 3. It's connecting 3 neurons to 2 neurons. So W2 has to be 2 by 3. In order to end up with this, I know that this has to come here, A3 minus Y, and A1 transpose comes at the end. And here I get my correct answer. Don't worry if it's the first time you do the chain rule and it's going quickly. Don't worry. Read the lecture notes with the rigorous part. Taking the derivative, it will make more sense. But I feel that usually in practice we don't compute these chain rules anymore because programming frameworks do it for us. But it's important to know at least how the chain rule decomposes. And also how to make these compute these derivatives if you read research papers specifically. Any questions on that? I think I want to go back to what you mentioned with the cache. So why is cache very important?
Cache?
That was your question as well? Yeah. It has to be. Right. So it means when you take the derivative of sigmoid, you take the derivative with respect to every entry of the matrix, which gives you an element-wise product. Going back to the cache. So one thing is, it seems that during backpropagation, there is a lot of terms that appear that were computed during forward propagation.
Okay.
Right? All these terms, A1 transpose, A2,
So we already
A3,
have them.
all
So
this,
we don't need
we have
to
it from the forward propagation. So if we don't cache anything, we have to recompute them. It means I'm going backwards.
Cache.
I
talked about
so
memory and RAM,
go forward
exactly.
again to get A2.
We cache so
I
that
go
we
backwards,
can
I need
have
A1. I need
free
to forward
memory.
propagate my X again to get
RAM.
A1. I don't want to do that. So in order to avoid that, when I do my forward propagation, I would keep in memory almost all the values that I'm getting, including the W's, because as you see, to compute the derivative of loss with
I'm a
respect to
genius,
W2, I need
guys. I'm
W3,
fucking genius.
but also the activation or linear variables.
Variable,
So I'm
yeah.
going to save them in my network
Seriously.
during the forward propagation in order to use it during the backward propagation.
Do it.
Does that make sense? and again, it's all for
39
computational
minutes.
efficiency, it has some memory
Let's
cost.
go for 20 more minutes, guys.
Okay, so that was the backpropagation, and now I can use my formula of the cost with respect to the loss function, and I know that this is going to be my update. This is going to be used in order to update W2. And I will do the same for W1. I think you guys can do it at home if you want to make sure you understood. Take the derivative with respect to W1.
I can poop here.
Okay,
right?
so let's move on to the next part, which is improving your neural network. So in practice, when you do this process of training, forward propagation, backward propagation, updates, you don't end up having a good network most of the time. In order to get a good network, you need to improve it. You need to use a bunch of techniques that will make your network work in practice. The first trick
practice,
is to
guys,
use different
important.
activation
Practice.
So together, we've seen one activation function, which was sigmoid.
Sigmoid.
And we
Tangent.
remember the
Arctangent.
graph of sigmoid is getting a number between minus infinity and plus infinity.
Well, it was
and
also
casting it between 0
softmax,
and 1.
right?
And we know that the formula is sigmoid of z equals 1 over 1 plus exponential minus z.
Exactly.
We also know that the derivative of sigmoid is sigmoid of z times 1 minus sigmoid of z.
Sigmoid of z. Haha.
Okay. Another very
so
common
it was not about
activation
logarithmic
function
loss
is ReLU. We talked quickly about it last time. ReLU of z, which is equal to 0 if z is less than 0, and z if z is positive. So the graph of ReLU
So it's like a
looks like
diode.
something like this.
What is ReLU? Rectifying loss unit.
And finally, another one we are using
rectifier, right?
commonly as well is tan h, so hyperbolic tangent.
Arctangent, right?
And tan h of z equals exponential z minus exponential minus z over exponential z plus exponential minus z. The derivative of tan h is 1 minus tan h
hyperbolic
squared of z.
Oh, tan h of z is tan of iz, I think,
And the
right?
graph?
Or I tan of iz.
Looks kind of like sigmoid, but
That's we have the minus
it
tan
goes
h
between minus 1
z squared
plus 1.
term instead of plus. So arctangent
So one question.
works nice too.
Now that I've given you 3 activation functions, can you guess why we would use one instead of the other, and which one has more benefits?
Why we use one instead of the others? That's a good question. Like, that's a question that makes your student creative. Well, ReLU was for the time we just needed the positive ones. Tangent H, well, different, for sure different usage, but like, I don't get, to be honest, I don't get the difference. Instead of tangent H, we can for sure say 1 plus tangent H. And then what is the difference between 1 plus tangent H and sigmoid? I don't know. They are pretty similar in their shape. They start from minus infinity, 0, and then end up in 1.
So when I talk about activation functions, I talk about the functions that you will put in these neurons after the linear part. What do you think is the main advantage of sigmoid?
It doesn't hit 0. Oh yes, because it doesn't hit 0, so when we have ratios, we don't have division by 0. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Also, sigmoid is like a
Yeah,
PDF.
you use it for classification between, it gives you a probability. What's the main disadvantage of sigmoid?
It's to bring the stuff too close together.
It's easy. That should be an advantage. Should be a benefit. Yeah. Correct. If you're at high activation, if you are high Z's or low Z's, your gradient is very close to 0. So look here. Based on this graph, we know that if Z is very big,
honestly, I wanted to say,
if Z is very big,
but this
our
is the
gradient
same
is going to
problem
be
with
very small.
tan
The slope
H2.
of this graph is very, very small. It's almost flat. Same for Z's that are very low in the negative. Right. What's the problem with having low gradients? Is when I'm back propagating, if the Z I cached was big, the gradient is going to be very small. And it will be super hard to update my parameters that are early in the network, because the gradient is just going to vanish. Does it make sense? So sigmoid is one of these activations which works very well in the linear regime, but has trouble working in saturating regimes because the network doesn't update the parameters properly. It goes very, very slowly. We're going to talk about that a little more. How about tan H? Very similar, right? Similar, like high Z's and low Z's lead to saturation of a tan H activation. ReLU, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem. If Z is very big in the positives, there's no saturation. The gradient just passes. And the gradient is 1 when we're here, right? The slope is equal to 1. So it's actually just directing the gradient to some entry. It's not multiplying it by anything when you backpropagate. So you know this term here, this term that I have here, all the A3 minus A3 times 1 minus A3 or A2 1 times 1 minus A2. If we use ReLU activations, we would change these with what? With the derivative of ReLU. And the derivative of ReLU can be written indicator function of Z being positive. You've seen indicator functions? So this is equal to 1 if Z is positive, 0 otherwise.
Yesterday and my back here.
Okay, so we will see why we use ReLU mostly.
I need to do some press-ups, I guess.
Yeah, you remember the house prediction example? In that case, if you want to predict the price of a house based on some features, you would use ReLU, because you know that the output should be a positive number between 0 and plus infinity. It doesn't make sense to use one of tan H or sigmoid. Yeah. Doesn't really matter. I think if I want my output to be between 0 and 1, I would use sigmoid. If I want my output to be between -1 and 1, I would use tan H. So you know there are some tasks where the output is kind of a reward or a minus reward that you want to get. Like in reinforcement learning, you would use tan H as an output activation, because -1 looks like a negative reward, +1 looks like a positive reward, and you want to decide what should be the reward. Good question. Why do we consider these functions? We can actually consider any functions apart from the identity function. So let's see why. Thanks for the transition. Like, why do we need activation functions?
No.
So let's assume that we have a network which is the same as before. So our network is 3 neurons casting into 2 neurons, casting into 1 neuron. And we're trying to use activations are equal to identity functions. So it means Z is given to Z. Let's try to derive the forward propagation. Y hat equals A3 equals Z3 equals W3 A2 plus B3. I know that A2 is equal to Z2 because there is no activation, and Z2 is equal to W2 A1 plus B2. So I can cast here W2 A1 plus B2 plus B3. I can continue. I know that A1 is equal to Z1, and I know that Z1 is W1 X plus B. And B equals W3 times W2 times B1 plus W3 times B2 plus B3. So what's the insight here? Is that we need activation functions. The reason is, if you don't use activation functions, no matter how deep is your network, it's going to be equivalent to a linear regression.
Yes.
So the complexity of the network comes from the activation function. And the reason
Otherwise,
we
it should be all
can
linear.
understand, if we're trying to detect cats, what we're trying to do is to train a network that will mimic the formula of detecting cats. We don't know this formula, so we want to mimic it using a lot of parameters. If we just have a linear regression, we cannot mimic this, because we're going to look at pixel by pixel and assign every weight to a certain pixel. If I give a new example, it's not going
Wait
to
a
work.
second. We need activation function to find the cat. Why can't we keep the whole system linear? He's talking about that, right? Why? Okay, somebody may say, fuck activation function. It makes more complicated. Makes the situation more complicated. Why should I use activation? If we don't use activation function, well, I see. Okay. Okay. Yes, activation function makes it more juicy. That's what it is. Makes the network non-linear. If we don't add activation functions, the whole system will be a mixed combination of linear functions, end up being linear function, which doesn't help. Well, you may say, why don't we have an activation function, just one layer of activation function? So if it is the problem is with the function being nonlinear, why don't we choose a nonlinear? Well, just saying a nonlinear function, it is too big. It's such a big space. If we focus on linear, all linear layers of linear, we ended up being linear. We ended up in, no matter how many layers we add, we end up in linear. We end up in linear regression, which cannot do the task for us. If we say, okay, let's have a nonlinear function. Nonlinear function, it is very good, but it's too big. We have no direction to move in this space. But if we add some structure to it, say, okay, we have these layers of linearity and these activation functions, which their form is decided by us. It's either tan H, or is it sigmoid, or is it ReLU. Then we know that, okay, we can have access to a set of nonlinear functions. Combination of these nonlinear functions won't end up being a similar family of functions. So we have a bigger family of functions, but we have some direction. We are not lost in this big space of nonlinear functions. That's the beauty of these layers.
Work anymore.
So we are giving order. We are making an order in this big space so that we are not lost. Very good. Honestly, he's the best teacher.
Yeah, so I think that goes back to your question as well. So this is why we need activation functions. And then the question was, can we use different activation functions? And how do we put them inside a layer or inside neurons? Usually we would use, there are more activation functions. I think in CS230 we go over a few more, but not today. These have been designed with experience. So these are the ones that work better and let our networks train. There are plenty of other activation functions that have been tested. Usually you would
use them because they work.
Use the same activation functions inside every layer. So when
we can have the option of mixing it, but again, we are making the space bigger. We may get lost. We need to have some order when decisions.
It's for training. It doesn't have any special reason, I think. But when you have a network like that, you would call this layer a ReLU layer, meaning it's a fully connected layer with ReLU activation. This one, a sigmoid layer, it means it's a fully connected layer with a sigmoid activation. And the last one is sigmoid. I think people have been trying a lot of putting different activations in different neurons, in a layer, in different layers. And the consensus was using one activation in the layer, and also using one of these 3 activations.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. So if someone comes up with a better activation that is obviously help.
Like obviously, right? These activation functions are working pretty fine. They are good enough. Like if they are doing the work 99% of the time and you are bringing another activation function that is just helping us 99.01%, fuck that activation. You're just bringing something with the ROI is so low. Yes, if you bring if you were like 70% of the time correct and you brought an activation function that helped us making it 90% of the time, well, that was worth it. If you brought a nonlinear function for a task that would do the job perfect.
Helping training our models on different data sets, people would adopt it. But right now, these are the ones that work better.
Very good. This guy is not teaching mental masturbation. That's what he is, who he is. He ain't a mental masturbator. He's saying at the end of the day, we care if something works. Shout out to this bro.
And last time we talked about hyperparameters a little bit. These are all hyperparameters. So in practice, you're not going to choose these randomly. You're going to try a bunch of them and choose some of them that seem to help your model train. There's a lot of experimental results in deep learning, and we don't really understand fully why certain activations work better than others. Okay, let's move on.
Oh my god, this was really good.
Okay, let's go over initialization techniques.
Is it an hour or? Yep, I think it's enough for now.
Actually.
Okay, that was a good lesson. Well, I like the last section, the part that they were doing these derivatives, and that was boring, to be honest. I get it, he's a teacher, he has to make sure everybody understands. But the last part, why we are using the sigmoids and we want to have a nonlinear function, that was super interesting. I loved it. I fucking loved it. A lot of lessons for life. Life is a neural network. Maybe not. Anyways, I didn't sleep, and I didn't even close my eyes. That's it. Goodbye.